Welcome to the Hardytown Baptist Church website. Technology has allowed churches everywhere to reach people worldwide. Through the internet, we are able to spread the message of Christ to a new audience. Recently, we have added a new feature to our website called Ask the Pastor. We encourage you to submit questions to us, and we will provide clear, concise, biblical answers to some of life's toughest questions. Some people claim that Jesus never taught on homosexuality. What does the Bible say about this? This question will be answered by Pastor Noah Rollerson, Associate Pastor and Minister of Students here at Hardytown Baptist Church.
With the debate in our culture today so hot on the issue of homosexuality and sexual ethics, the argument often comes up that Jesus never explicitly taught on homosexuality. Proponents of same-sex marriage and of the homosexual community will claim that Jesus never in the Gospels taught anything about homosexuality. And in a certain way this is true, but in another way it's not. While Jesus never explicitly taught on homosexuality, he did teach on sexual ethics and marriage from an Old Testament perspective and from an Old Testament background, which by default does address the issue of homosexuality. We'll look at it this way. If I told you that all red cars were better than any other cars, I couldn't be saying at the same time that black cars and blue cars were just as good. By saying that red cars are good and best, I'm by default saying that other cars are inferior. So while it is true that Jesus never explicitly addressed the issue of homosexuality outright, the teaching of the Gospels of Jesus proves that it is incorrect to claim that Jesus was silent in regards to God's standards concerning marriage and sexual behavior. Let's go a little further. Jesus always affirmed the Old Testament law. More specifically, Jesus affirmed God's standards for marriage when asked about relationships in eternity by the Pharisees. Jesus taught that in the resurrection, or what we would refer to as heaven, that people would not be married or given in marriage. Note the distinction between marriage and given in marriage. In Jesus' culture, this distinction would have been understood to denote gender, and those who marry would have been the males, while those who have been given to marry would be the females. This isn't really that hard for us to comprehend today, as this custom is still practiced in our culture, as the bride is giving away to the groom in many ceremonies. Jesus further affirmed marriage as between one man and one woman for life when questioned about divorce. Matthew records that when asked about marriage and divorce by certain Pharisees, Jesus quoted Genesis 2:24, which reinforces the marriage of one man and one woman, Genesis 2:24 being the marriage of Adam and Eve. Mark also records this event in the gospel accounts where Jesus affirms the accounts in Genesis and the institution of marriage and family. Time and again, Jesus pointed his followers and his skeptics alike to the Old Testament to affirm his teachings and reinforce the ideas of Scripture as the standard for morality, including sexual ethics. It would be impossible for Jesus to condone homosexuality given his devotion and reliance to the teaching of the Old Testament. Jesus said in Matthew 5:17-19 that he came to fulfill the law, that his life and work and ministry was the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, which is the Old Testament. He could not come to fulfill those if he was teaching contrary to the Old Testament law. So we know that Jesus could not condone homosexual behavior. And some wonder why Jesus never took the time to specifically and explicitly condemn homosexuality in his culture. The answer to this question is defined in one simple word: audience. In Jesus' day in Palestine, in the Jewish communities, the Jews still followed the Old Testament very strictly and would not have struggled with homosexuality, at least not openly. It is unlikely a devout Jewish community at this time would contain open practicing homosexuals, so therefore Jesus did not need to take the time to teach on that as explicitly as would Paul, on the other hand, serving in very Greek and Roman communities where homosexuality was more common and acceptable. Paul addressed these issues very explicitly in Romans 1, 1 Corinthians 6, and 1 Timothy 1 as problematic to ministry, whereas Jesus likely did not encounter homosexuality on a grand scale in Palestine.